Welcome to this edition of the webinar series that the Committee on the Present Danger of China has been proud to sponsor throughout 2025, as it has for the previous year or two. We look forward to doing more of the same in 2026, and the question is, what are we going to be talking about in that new year? Might it be that Xi Jinping, still in power in communist China, determines on the basis of the correlation of forces or calculations of comprehensive national power, which the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, specializes, that the time has come to move from the unrestricted warfare that Communist China has been engaged in at least since 1999, when two colonels in the People's Liberation Army published a book by that name, Unrestricted Warfare. And it's hard not to note that essentially every line of attack that they identified for the purposes of taking down the United States without using kinetic means, or at least explosive ones, has now been operationalized by the Chinese against us with considerable devastating effect. This series has been largely preoccupied with identifying what the Chinese are doing in this regard, and also how they upped the game in May of 2019 when they announced on the pages of People's Daily, no less, that they were now embarking upon a, quote, people's war, unquote, against the United States of America. Further ratcheting up, in which it was clear every aspect of Chinese society would be mobilized and weaponized for the purposes of defeating the enemy, which would be us. The question that we're going to assess today with three of our most respected and I think accomplished members of the Committee on the Present Danger of China is, will 2026 be the year in which that correlation of forces calculation by Xi Jinping suggests it's time to go into a shooting war, the old-fashioned kinetic kind? The evidence that that may be the case, the evidence that at the minimum, the option is now available to Xi, is what we are going to particularly focus on today. And I'm very grateful to each of our presenters for helping bring their insights and expertise to bear, to do a little crystal ball gazing, and most especially to help us not simply warn the American people about what might be in the offing, but entreat both them and their elected representatives to take the sorts of steps that there may yet be time to take, even at this late hour, to not only prepare for what the Chinese Communist Party could unleash upon us, but also, if at all possible, to deter them from doing so. We're going to begin, as we often do in these programs, with a career intelligence operative of the Central Intelligence Agency, now retired. His name is Charles Samphatis. For 20 years, he operated mostly behind enemy lines, assessing, reporting on, and doing what could be done by a very courageous and highly accomplished spy to defeat America's enemies. We have spoken to him in connection with our television program for today, Securing America. He was kind enough to agree to have us dual purpose part of that interview as a contribution to this program. And we'll go to the video with Samphatis for this purpose at this point.
act like we're being very sage and very wise because we acknowledge that one of these days we might have a real problem. And in this sense, you know, the Chinese might actually tee off and go past the kind of warfare that they are already practicing to a straight-up military confrontation. And yet, when we're all done with that act, making noises like we're taking it really seriously, we always just kick the can down the road to some future date. It can't be today. It's, you know, if a few years ago, maybe it's 2026 or something, but now it's about to be 2026. So, no, it's 2030 or 2035. And you're like, if you read history, you've seen this pattern, right? You've seen all the indications prior to World War II, which were numerous, and the war was in effect already in progress, and yet for many people up until the point where the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, it was still one of these things that might one day happen. So, you know, I guess my thesis here is, aren't we already there? I mean, isn't that exactly where we are right now? How far down the road are we on the buildup of Chinese conventional forces, right? With these guys now challenging us directly in terms of a blue water navy and the construction of aircraft carriers and the increase in their conventional forces and the construction of vessels to allow them to invade Taiwan. How far down the road are we in watching them develop the capacity to destroy our critical infrastructure, which is not a sort of sabotage campaign all by itself, but is in its way a sort of electronic Pearl Harbor, right? You take down water, power, communications at the same time that you move against Taiwan. How far down the road are we into watching them build up missile forces to take out take out our bases on Guam and other locations, like their movements against the Philippines and against other countries in the South China? I mean, you're watching, you look at the totality of this and you think, okay, well, we are there. This is not one of these days 10 years from now, maybe in a fantasy world. We are on the cusp, and I guess what I find most alarming is there seems to be a complete absence. I mean, obviously not amongst certain people. We talk about it all the time. But at a national level, where is the awareness of this and the sense of urgency that we have to move? I was talking to another colleague this morning before I came on, and I was talking about when I was in the United States Army before I became a JAG officer. I was a tanker, and I was at Fort Knox, Kentucky, going through armor school in 1983. Well, my class motto was "Kill Russians." Not informally. You know, when you fall in, you have to sound off with your class motto. Well, that is what we yelled in unison, and it was written in Cyrillic on our T-shirts that we wore to do PT. Now, not the most subtle thing, perhaps, but the point was, that's what was drummed into our head all day, every day. Your entire purpose, your existence, is you're supposed to be the guys that go to the Fulda Gap and stop the Russians from making it to Paris in about 48 hours. And that's, we trained against their tactics and trained for that purpose and knew precisely how many Russian tanks we had to destroy for every one we lost. But the point was, it was crystal clear who the adversary was, and we didn't dance around it. That was our purpose. Yet that seems to me to be completely absent from, now we're still talking, even under this administration, talking in terms of coexistence and cooperation, and you know, these guys want to tear our throats out, and we're still talking about getting along with them. As Captain Fennell would say, why don't we start with the main thing? right? I mean, obviously the United States faces a variety of threats, and we need to be focused on them. I'm saying we should ignore them. But isn't the existential threat from our number one enemy on the planet the main thing? Doesn't everything have to be driven by what happens when the Chinese move against Taiwan, take out Guam, sink one of our carriers in the South China Sea? What's the plan? Well, the plan, despite all the talk, the answer is we're not focused on the main thing. Our missile stocks are down to the point where, the estimates are 7 days into a war with China, we're out of ammo. That's a bad thing, as we would say, right? That's a big deal. Across the board, we are nowhere close to ready for this.
Well, as often is the case, a bracing message from a man who is very clear-eyed about threats. He has lived amongst them and helped counter them for his entire professional life. And we are very appreciative, Sam Faddis, helping to set the stage for this particular conversation about preparedness, about situational awareness, and about specifically what must be done to put the United States, its people, its society, its industrial base on a war footing in light of the fact that unmistakably, I think it's fair to say, every class in the Chinese People's Liberation Army's training program has as its motto, kill Americans. A man who has also served his country with great distinction, both in the uniform of the United States Marine Corps as well as a foreign service officer, is another of our very, very important members of the Committee on the Present Danger of China, and almost indefatigably contributor to these programs and the work of the committee more generally. His name is Colonel Grant Newsham. He is retired from the Marines and has been in business for quite some time in the Far East, since leaving the Foreign Service, in which he served in the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. He's forward deployed in the region, and we're very grateful to him for working the dog watch, I guess is what they call it, the very, very late hours that we cause him to keep here. And he does it uncomplainingly and with great effect, for which we're very grateful. He is, among other things, a frequent contributor to periodical literature with essays and columns and other pronouncements, frequently on programs, including, of course, ours, Securing America. But in addition to all of that, he is the author of a best-selling book, When China Attacks, A Warning to America. And we've asked him to talk through with us what that looks like when China attacks, should it decide to go kinetic. And most especially, what we should be looking for now as we try to discern if that is in the offing in 2006, or perhaps if we're lucky, somewhat further down the line. Colonel Newsham, once again, welcome to this program. Thank you for being up in the middle of the night, your time, and for your help in illuminating all of these issues as you inevitably do. Where's yours, sir?
Okay, well, thanks very much, Frank. Glad to be here. After listening to Sam Faddis, I feel like going back to Oklahoma and pumping gas. But until then, I'm going to address this question. Is China going to go kinetic, or are they going to start shooting in 2026? Of course, I don't know. And I think the only one who might know is Xi Jinping, but I'll sort of walk through how I think about this. And my sense of it is that at least I get asked to say, when do I think China is going to start a war? And I said from September 2024, anytime after that, I would not be surprised. So we're somewhere into that, sort of that range. In fact, I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. And I think that it would have if Kamala Harris had been elected president. The Chinese pay very close attention to the state of affairs in the United States, in Washington, and particularly the Oval Office and who's in there. And if they look weak, look confused, distracted, that makes it really tempting for them. But they pay very close attention to that. I think the election of Donald Trump in late 2024 probably caused them to rethink this. China's military actually is really good. 25 years ago, you'd find that military officers used to laugh about it. They used to joke about the idea of China attacking Taiwan as a million-man swim, but they have taken the last few decades of American sort of indifference and actually accommodation to build up a military which could cause us an awful lot of trouble. And they can throw their weight around in Asia, just about anywhere, if they have a mind to and are willing to take the heat for it. And they are capable of going after Taiwan. They are capable of thinking that they could succeed in an amphibious, airborne, full-scale assault on Taiwan. And they've been capable of this actually since at least 2000, I would say, and probably a lot longer, probably maybe even 2010. People have downplayed it, dismissed it, but I think that's wrong. You would often hear that the idea that an amphibious operation is the most complex military operation known to man, and the implicit subtext was the Chinese are just too stupid to figure this out. But that is dangerous condescension, and too often that has been how we've looked at Chinese military capabilities. But they have gotten actually very good in all spheres, and they're getting better. They know where their shortcomings are and are trying to address these. And I would take the word of Admiral Paparo, the commander at US Indo-PACOM, who said not all that long ago that what the Chinese are doing around Taiwan is rehearsals. It's not exercises. And Admiral Paparo is good on this subject. He has all the intelligence. And if he's saying that, well, I'm willing to take him at his word. And anytime the Chinese want, they can start a war, can start an attack on Taiwan. The one thing I think that holds them back and that they may sort of pause is that the opposition in Taiwan, the KMT in particular, is led by some people who are very pro-Chinese, who, if they could, they would disarm Taiwan and pretty much surrender to the PRC. That's how bad it is, as hard as that is to imagine. But that's the nature of the opposition in Taiwan. And the opposition controls the legislature. And the Chinese look at this, and I think they're thinking, well, let's see how this plays out. Let's see how the political situation, the domestic situation in Taiwan turns out, see how the next election goes, and we'll try to help it go a certain way, of course, and then see. So the Chinese are able to go after Taiwan anytime they want, and I think the one thing that does hold them back is the state of domestic politics and having their proxies pretty close to being in power in Taiwan. But one thing I'd notice is that the focus here is always in Taiwan. It's on Taiwan, and everyone talks about when is China going to go after Taiwan. Some years ago, a foreign reporter, back when the word actually meant something, told me, he says, look where everybody else isn't. So when everyone is looking at a potential Chinese attack on Taiwan, they probably do well to actually look somewhere else and say, where might the Chinese attack? And one area, southern Japan, the southern islands, the Nansei Shoto, the Ryukyus in English, the Chinese have been very active militarily up there. They have really been they've been stretching the Japanese. And the Chinese, on occasion, actually have put in several hundred fishing boats into those waters up there. Best just sending a message to the Japanese saying, anytime we want, we can swarm you. And I think they just might. If I was a betting man, I would put a little money on the Chinese actually seizing some Japanese territory down south, maybe even taking a shot at a Japanese Coast Guard ship, Japanese fishing ship, just to get things started. And that's somewhere that I think some attention should be paid. The Chinese would like nothing more than to have their victims fire a shot. And then they can claim they were provoked, they had no choice, it's all everyone else's fault. You can see that they have been trying to provoke the Filipinos. They've been trying to provoke the Japanese for at least 15 years. They haven't taken the bait. The Chinese interceptions of, say, Australian, Canadian, American, Japanese surveillance aircraft, these are intended to cause some trouble and to have the other side respond. And the Chinese are showing that they really don't care if somebody gets killed in all of that. So the idea that the Chinese are somehow sort of reluctant to shed blood, I don't think that's quite right. And so another possible option, of course, besides Taiwan, Japan, maybe go after the Philippines, some part of Philippine territory, where you put the Filipinos in a position where they cannot respond and dare the Americans to do something about it. Additionally, maybe take a shot, say, at some aircraft of not of the Americans, but of somebody else, and see if the Americans are willing to risk World War III in exchange, after something like that. So one thing I would say in terms of where the Chinese might operate, it's probably not going to, if they go kinetic, it's not going to be, say, any more than 1,000 miles off the Chinese mainland. And that's about the range at which they can really sort of project power effectively. So who's in there? Well, we just named it: Taiwan, Philippines, Japan. I don't think they're going to go after Korea. The Chinese have a friendly administration in South Korea now. They probably wouldn't go after Vietnam, and I doubt they would bother with Australia at the moment. And keep in mind that within that about 500 to 1,000-mile range, the Chinese have a huge overmatch over just about anyone else. They can put, for example, into the South China Sea, when the Americans send a couple ships through, the Chinese can cover it with at least 10 to 20 for every ship that we put in, more if they wanted. And that doesn't account for land-based forces, that weaponry that they can deploy. So, yes, we can sail anywhere we want, but the Chinese can outmatch us in terms of numbers in particular, and their capabilities are good enough. And one should remember that a military only has to be good enough to do a certain thing at a certain place at a certain time. So while the Chinese have shortcomings, and while we would probably defeat them if the fight was off of San Diego, if it's much closer to the Chinese mainland, that's going to be a very bloody affair for us. Now, one thing to keep in mind and to watch, and we've been watching it for some years now, is actually Xi Jinping's efforts to sanctions-proof the Chinese economy. They've been storing oil, food, natural raw materials, stockpiling it far beyond any reasonable need. And Xi Jinping talks about this, and he even is warning, he's telling his population to get ready to absorb some punishment and to eat bitterness. He's been talking up the Korean War is actually a very sound move by Mao Zedong, getting into that despite the punishment China suffered. Put all these together, and that sort of, one should be worried. And he also finally has some allies. The Russians and the Chinese have never gotten along better than they are now. The North Koreans are useful cat's paw as well, stronger than they've ever been. And we may laugh about this as being just sort of these weird communists or dictatorships that are joining together, but they have some punch and can cause us lots of trouble. He also has plenty of votes that he will get in public forums like the United Nations from the so-called Global South. They've been very careful about that. One weakness the Chinese have that they have to consider is the role of the US dollar as the dominant currency. And Chinese money isn't all that, it really isn't very useful overseas. That is a huge weakness. But if you're willing to accept the punishment and the trouble that's caused of being sort of cut off from the global economy, the Western trading system at least, that may not be as big an advantage as we think it is. Would China's economic difficulties cause Xi to lash out? I don't know. And I would suggest that it's 50-50 on that. Perhaps more, he has staked his reputation on taking Taiwan, sort of rejuvenating China, being seen as the guy that has brought China to the forefront, and if not world domination. And in that sort of a system, if you put your reputation out there, at some point you're going to have to deliver. And Xi Jinping told President Biden in San Francisco a couple of years ago when they met, if you heard what he said, it should have made your skin crawl. He said, yes, all this talk about Taiwan, peaceful resolution is good, but we're not going to wait forever, and you Americans have to cooperate with us. It's putting the onus on the Americans. So what we're ultimately talking about, of course, is kinetic warfare. And that's the actual shooting. The Chinese conception of war is very different than ours. And they've been at war with us for 30, 40, 50 years, and they'll tell you that. And the attacks, of course, have come on, say, the economic front, financial propaganda, buying off, it seems like half of America's elite class, if not more, winning over Wall Street, etc. And they've been fighting this. They've been improving their position. They've been weakening ours. They've caused us to turn on each other or stoke that sort of entropic warfare, all the while building up a military that is a force to reckon with. And read the Department of War's annual China military power report, or just even skim it, and you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about there. Meanwhile, we don't seem able to even figure out how to build warships the way we need to do it. We seem to stumble over the simplest things. And China also looks at this and says, well, we caused the Americans all this trouble with COVID, an act of really biological or chemical warfare, and we suffered no punishment for it. And then fentanyl, we've killed about 750,000 Americans with this drug, taken the equivalents of 3 or 4 divisions of Army or Marines off the field every year for about the last 12 years. And that's just the dead. The wounded are about 10 times as many, and the punishment for that, pretty much nothing. The other day, Mr. Trump did issue an executive order calling fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction. But let's see what actually gets done with that, to punish China for what they've done. So China looks at everything. It looks at its military, looks at the state of America, looks at the state of the countries around it, and it looks at what it just might get from starting a war. And it just might say that now's the time. So, do I know exactly when, or I don't know. But I would say if I turned on the news and saw one day that China has started shooting somewhere, some of the places we've talked about, I might be a little surprised just that it happened, but I would not be shocked. I think that's where we are now. So thanks very much.
Colonel Nisham, thank you for an incredibly comprehensive overview. Deep crystal ball gazing, I think, and some very helpful pointers as to what to be both looking for and preparing to counter. Precisely what I hoped we would get from you. And as usual, you have not only served up what is required, but done it surpassingly well. We're going to turn next to our colleague and the chairman of our Committee on the Present Danger of China, Brian T. Kennedy. Brian is an accomplished policy practitioner, notably in his years as the president of the highly regarded Claremont Institute, as well as in his present role as the president of the American Strategy Group. He's the author, among other things, of a wonderful encounter booklet, China's War Inside America. He has been incredibly impressive in terms of characterizing the Chinese threat and thinking creatively about how we can mitigate it. And I just want to say I've been privileged to be his wingman throughout these programs, because I think with his leadership and this team on the committee, we've helpfully provided is deep informational content for this diabolical danger of China. And I want to just say that as we wrap up this year and we look as best we can through the darkly glass, as they say, into 2026, I think these reports, analyses, and commentaries and the like that we are providing are going to be, I'm afraid, more needed than ever, and possibly spend a lot more time on the post pre-kinetic period, if I can put it that way, than we have today. Brian Kennedy, thank you for joining us and for your, as I say, leadership in all of this, and the floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you, Frank, and thank you for your leadership. I get a lot of credit. You do a lot of the work, and everybody who is watching these webinars weekly knows that you're the man when it comes to the Committee on the Present Danger of China and all of its fine work it's my privilege to be working with you on all this, Frank. So thank you. I agree wholeheartedly with Sam Faddis and with Grant Newsham on everything they had to say. It was comprehensive. I'll just say a few things about how I think we may or may not be ready to go kinetic when it comes to communist China. I was struck last Sunday by the fact that the New York Times had a special pullout section, which I think did not get much attention, and it was called Overmatched, the Need for the American Military to Reinvent Itself. And it was a pretty comprehensive, it's like, a dozen or so pages, all by the editors of the New York Times. And I was saying to our colleague, Steve Bannon, it's almost as if the editors of the New York Times had spent the last year listening to the Committee on the Present Danger of China and then decided to do this pullout. Now, it doesn't agree with us 100%, but their essential theme is that the United States is overmatched militarily. They make the case that we don't have the military today to take on communist China, that the communist Chinese can outgun us in the Pacific. They make the point that has been reiterated over the last month or so, that if a kinetic war did occur, then we would lose if the war games that we simulate conflict with China hold true, that our ships run out of munitions. However capable and modern our aircraft are, they too run out of munitions. The ability for one of their hypersonic missiles to sink one of our aircraft carriers is certainly there, and that overall we're not up to snuff. There's that point that the editors of the New York Times make. They also make the point that the Chinese have imported into the country 200,000. They don't use the number 200,000, but they make the point that the Chinese certainly have people within the country who are capable of subterfuge and sabotage within the country. So they acknowledge that there are special forces. They talk about biowarfare in the United States, something that this committee has highlighted over the last 2 or 3 years. The editors of the New York Times, if you can believe it, talk about how our industrial base is insufficient to build the kind of military we need for the future, something we've been highlighting consistently. So when I read this, I was struck by the fact that they were telling the American people the truth. Now, were they telling them the truth because they wanted it fixed, or because they wanted it somehow to seem inevitable that when war comes with communist China, we ought not to be fighting it because we may not win it, which is probably more likely the case with them, with the motivation of the New York Times. They don't think that any kind of series of agreements we could make with communist China would be upheld, which is given the fact that the communist Chinese do not uphold any agreement and they believe in renegotiate everything, seems quite sensible to me. So they're laying out a world, the New York Times is, where war would come and we would lose, and that we ought to be mindful of that, which I found very interesting. We know today that we don't have the military we need. And as much as President Trump is for rebuilding the American military, we don't know if that's going to happen quickly enough. And we need a far more advanced aircraft of the kind he has proposed, but we're not going to get it in the short run. We need the Golden Dome missile defense. We're not going to get it in the short run. We need a more sophisticated Navy than the one we have today, and a larger Navy than the one we have today. And we know in the short run, we're not going to get one. And so when it comes to how we think about whether war would come or not, we have to take those things into consideration. We're not behaving today as if war is imminent, and we should. We should be working around the clock on those three things I've just described. We're not. And it's partly because we have other priorities. One is getting the U.S. economy on the right track and reforming the Pentagon to make sure that we're spending money the right way. And I think although we are doing many things correctly, we're not doing them at the pace we need to. And that's something I think we need to be very concerned about that. Second, I think I would say we're already in a kind of kinetic war, given the fentanyl that Grant Newsham just mentioned. So they're already killing Americans. We know, and unfortunately, the president downgraded the severity of, or the classification of, let's just say, marijuana. We know that the Chinese have grow houses operating in the United States where they're producing illegal marijuana and spreading it, selling it throughout the population, which both, in my opinion, makes America stupid, because marijuana is not the kind of thing an industrious people would spend their time inhaling. And also, the sale of marijuana that way it helps fund China's underground operations in the United States. And we're not doing everything we can to stop those things. That should be of a concern. They're already at war with us, and they do have people, as we've highlighted on the show, 200,000 some men of military age who are in this country, prepared to go kinetic in ways that are not easily going to be traced. When a power transformer goes down, or a shopping mall gets shot up, or something else, use your imagination, happens, we won't obviously know it's the communist Chinese. And so they have a way of putting us on our back foot just because of the open borders we've had during the Biden administration. And again, we've not been working quickly enough to get rid of those 25 million. That's the number the president uses. We're not getting rid of those 25 million quickly enough, nor do we have special forces operating today to get rid of those 200,000 Chinese, let's consider them special forces, that are here in this country. And so just at the most basic level, they see, the Chinese do, that we're not operating at peak capacity, let's say, and we ought to be. The Chinese may be of the view that they're winning. And so when you're winning, why engage in a kinetic war? They seem to be getting from the trade deals we have with them, greater cooperation. We've agreed now to sell them our second best AI chips that NVIDIA produces. They seem to have us over a barrel when it comes to rare earth minerals, and it's one of the reasons we're selling them the AI chips. And so from a economic point of view, they might believe they're still winning. Their trade deficit with the U.S., I think, was $1 trillion this year. And so why upset that apple cart? If they did go kinetic, they would have to be prepared to lose all of that. And yes, they may be able to store foodstuffs and oil and other things. But if you're talking about a kinetic war with the United States, you're really proposing a global reset of the economy, where they may have to go it alone. Are they prepared to do that? Well, they might be. We at least have to be prepared to have the kind of military that can deter that option. And today we don't completely have that without going nuclear, and that's not something anyone would desire. We also have to consider that over the last decade, they've had very close relations with Venezuela. And right now the U.S. has a large military contingent off the coast of Venezuela. In Venezuela, the Communist Chinese have provided them with fighter aircraft, maybe 20 or so. They've given them certain kind of missilery and other advanced weaponry, and we're not exactly sure what that looks like. And so they put that just off the coast of the United States, as it were, Venezuela being in South America, but not that far away from the United States. The Russians have as well, and quite possibly the Iranians have as well. So the Chinese, the Russians, and the Iranians have played a kind of surrogate game in Venezuela. So they move on Taiwan they could also be moving on the United States from Venezuela. Again, the Chinese are masters of strategy and deception and playing these surrogate wars against the United States. If there's a takeaway from our conversation, I think, Frank, it's that we need to be vastly more prepared than we are today to think of this as a war has already started, and are we prepared to deter Communist China from the most severe actions that they could possibly take? Have we deterred them from that? The answer is we hope so, but we don't know so. And so we need to get on far better war footing than we are today, and to make sure that we're absolutely clear with Xi Jinping that the United States will do whatever it takes to defend itself from Chinese aggression, especially against America and American interests. So thank you, Frank. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Brian. Much food for thought in all three of these presentations, and I'm grateful that we have some time yet to explore some of the things that have been elevated as issues, and see if we can make some further recommendations about how to prevent 2006 from 26 rather from being a year of living very dangerously indeed at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. Let me just start, Grant Newsom, you gave us a wonderful tour d'horizon, as the French would say, in terms of the places where the Chinese might act aggressively, and the places where they seem not to need to do so, or maybe it's just that they don't have to use force of arms to accomplish their desires, because in South Korea, as you pointed out, there is the communist who's come to power, closely aligned with the Chinese Communist Party. I get the sense that that's true in Australia as well. What is your sense of the calculation that the Chinese are making? You mentioned that the Kuomintang may essentially prompt the Chinese to say we don't need to worry about Taiwan at the moment; it'll fall into our lap. But how about these other allies of the United States and the correlation of forces, or the comprehensive national power calculations that arise from these compromised individuals, shall we say?
Well, I think the Chinese have done very well in South Korea, even though most South Koreans don't like China or the Chinese. The very hardcore radical group of leftists have taken over in South Korea, the Lee Jae-myung administration. And one of the guy who's very influential, he's the elder brother of the prime minister of South Korea, has said that the Trump administration, Trump's America, is the apex of Yankee imperialism. The Chinese like this. And even though most South Koreans don't want to go where Lee Jae-myung wants to take them, you're in a position to at least maybe have the South Koreans stand clear, say if you move on Taiwan, if you move on Japan. And you've also got a North Korea that can keep people fixed in place. It just requires a certain some movements, and you'll have the South Koreans fixated. The Americans and the Japanese will have to devote resources to it. If the Russians make some moves as well, the Japanese are going to be stuck with that, dealing with that. And that's less attention, less resources you can apply, say, to Taiwan. Chinese political warfare, cognitive warfare is everywhere. The Philippines, Japan, Australia, just everywhere, and Washington, D.C. I've said this before, but Peter Schweitzer writes these excellent books that are New York Times bestsellers about the subordination, the subversion of America's ruling class, American elites, by the Chinese Communist Party. And he lays out names, he lays out a prosecutor's brief, and nobody ever sues him. They just ignore him. So the Chinese political warfare has just been immense. So you will find that there's a huge constituency in the event China makes a move somewhere in Asia, starts shooting, that says, look, let's de-escalate. We want the status quo to continue. This is going to hurt business, it's going to hurt our economy. So China has people who will do their bidding for them. And as Brian Kennedy mentioned, at the same time, if you go after somebody in Asia, you're going to do some things that are going to cause the Americans immense distraction. The well-reported evidence that the Chinese are into our critical infrastructure, burrowed in there just waiting, and able to cause us immense harm. Well, you can expect to see the lights go out, the ATM stop working, the internet go down, should something happen out in Asia. And then you do have the special forces, the agents in place who, say, with armed drones can take out our aerial refuelers lined up at the air bases, take out our fighter force. You'll find that the Navy will have some trouble might even have some trouble getting out of San Diego after drones have hit some of their ships or somehow they've been sort of interfered with. So you can expect that if there is trouble in Asia, that you're going to have these supporting moves that help the Chinese in surrounding countries, but also back in the United States, and then the Europeans themselves. They're something of a mess at the moment also. So China, when they look at what they're going to do, they tend to look at the whole map and see how they can set things up to give themselves the best chances of success. And they spent decades doing that, and they've had a lot of success. And it just makes it more difficult. It's a bigger challenge for us. The game's not over, but we do need to wake up and have some urgency about dealing with it.
This is clearly a recurring theme of waking up and preparing up. Brian, you mentioned Golden Dome, and this has not gotten as much attention as it seems to me it deserves. The president quite explicitly had in mind in a modern multi-tiered missile defense capability, a space component. And I'm given to understand that within the past 24 hours, the president has issued a space superiority executive order. It's one thing to say that's what our goal is. It's another, of course, to achieve superiority or even begin putting in place the capabilities that are needed. Again, you've given a lot of thought to the importance of space for our security, both, by the way, military as well as economic. Would you talk us through a little bit what the president's now saying on that score, and how far we have to go to assure that we have it over the Chinese, given the immense efforts they're making on the moon and cislunar space beyond?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Frank. Let me be clear that I think President Trump, when he says those things, does so because he believes that there has to be a national commitment to space superiority, to strategic superiority more broadly. It's not his way to go around talking about communist China and their ability to engage in kinetic war the way we've been describing. He has a lot of considerations going on between the U.S. economy, giving people confidence about investing in that and our future, and also trying to take the necessary steps to make sure that we have the military in place to deter communist China from taking the most radical steps. He'll often say things like, we have these awesome weapons that can do horrible things. And of course, we do have awesome weapons that can do horrible things. And we do have a military filled with men and women who are actually, absolutely devoted to the security of this country. But they've been operating for some time with inadequate resources, or to put it differently, resources that were spent badly on the kind of things that were absolutely necessary. Communist China has been preparing for war, is prepared for war. Could they engage in war today? Yes, but at what cost? At what point in a war, if it escalated, would nuclear weapons be used? And if you listen to, both Sam and Grant, these are not things that are inconceivable. And President Trump understands that. So the Golden Dome is meant to be a way of deterring the use of nuclear weapons, to be clear. the multi-tiered layers would be obviously ground-based, sea-based, air-based, but more importantly, space-based, to make sure that if a nuclear weapon were shot at the United States, we would have the capability to shoot it down before it hit the American homeland. If that is a goal of this government, and I believe it is, are we doing it at a pace that will make that a reality? Do we have a space-based missile defense that can be put up? Do we have a design that's been submitted? I mean, they're still looking at the designs of what could be used to provide that space-based missile defense. In a more concrete terms, there's always been talk of a space-based laser, which would require several of them in space to be able to target enemy missiles. There is space-based interceptors, the Brilliant Pebbles program from the 1990s being constellations around the globe to make sure that in the boost phase of an enemy missile being launched, we could intercept and destroy that enemy missile. I think given advances in technology, whether it's anything Elon Musk is doing or Palmer Luckey with Anduril Industries or other folks out there, we could have deployed, if we made it a national priority, something in very short order. I and you, Frank, I think have made the argument that we can put something up 3 months from now. Will it be perfect? No. Will it be the start? Yes. Design something that could be put up 3 months from now. And then 3 months later, something more, something better. But make it a national commitment like a Manhattan Project that was done in World War II to build an atomic weapon. Do something at that kind of a pace where men were working around the clock to both test, design, and then deploy an atomic weapon. If we had that kind of commitment when it came to a space-based missile defense, we could put something up in short order. And if we did, again, it wouldn't be perfect, but it would be a start. And it would show to Communist China a commitment to our national defense that we have not previously deployed. Today, we have a land-based system that is very inadequate, almost completely inadequate, to stop Communist China or Russia or an Iranian ship-launched ballistic missile. It will stop some missiles from North Korea, but it is far from perfect. There are air-based defenses, like drones, that could also be used, perhaps off the coast of North Korea, or off the coast, perhaps, of Communist China or elsewhere, to make sure that an enemy missile could be stopped early in its launch. Again, we're not putting the resources toward these things to get this done in a timely way. And when the president does have this commitment to space superiority, I think that is excellent. I highly approve of it. And now he needs an administration that can carry that out. Because every day that goes by when Communist China does not see that being carried out, they don't believe we're serious. And today, if there's anything we do, it's to show that we are serious about our national defense.
Brian, let me stay with you because you and I co-authored a letter to the Deputy Chief of Staff in the White House, Stephen Miller, in connection with responsibilities that he's evidently been given to try to ensure that there isn't any, well, to use the old Star Wars phraseology, perturbation in the force, shall we say, with China in connection with the so-called trade truce that has been negotiated, principally involving, I guess, rare earth minerals and our access to them. I just wonder if you would continue on the theme that you were just exploring with us, the Chinese perceptions of the lengths that we seem to be going to reduce any possible upset with them. And knowing as you do history, is there reason to be concerned that that might further induce them to think they can behave badly?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Frank. I'm not sure. So much of what the administration does is a delicate kind of dance to make sure that China behaves itself. And although we want to get along with them, and Stephen Miller is tasked with making sure that things go swimmingly when it comes to trade and rare earths and other things we want to be exchanging with them, the Chinese invariably do what they want to do, and they don't take seriously a lot of these overtures by the United States to play nice. Secretary Bessent negotiates trade deals with Communist China. There are these presumptions about what they ought to do, and then they don't get done. Or they get done, but then there are these, walkbacks of details. Again, a kind of renegotiation on the part of Communist China. And if there's anybody I have confidence in, it's Stephen Miller, to make sure that he's being faithful to what President Trump wants. President Trump wants fair deals. He's not giving away the store to Communist China. He's making sure that we have access to certain things, and if that costs us, making sure they have access to certain things they want, in this case, rare earth minerals for these advanced AI chips. Well, he's going to make whatever reasonable compromises that may be required to get these things done. But over time, I think the administration is going to has learned, obviously, that Communist China is not to be trusted. Can they be trusted in the short run? Well, we'll see. And I think Stephen Miller was tasked with making sure to find out whether we can be trusted. We're not going to give away the store here. And there's a lot of things that still need to be done to make sure that Communist China pays for what it's done to the United States, whether it's fentanyl or COVID-19 or a variety of things. They do not play fair. They are in a war. They believe we're in a war. They want to see how far they can push the United States. And I think it's the job of the committee to highlight these things, to help the administration make sure that the American people understand this, and to describe for the administration just what the Communist Chinese are doing strategically when it comes to their desire to dominate the world, including the United States. The Chinese strategy has been to extract from the United States for a half century our technology and our know-how. And that continues to this day. If it were up to me, I wouldn't sell them anything. I wouldn't buy anything from them. And I wouldn't have a single Chinese national in the United States. That's what war looks like, by the way. If we're really in a war with them and they think they're in a war with us, we have to think differently than we do today. And it's organizing our national economy and our national resolve to make this a reality. We're in the process of doing a lot of good things. And part of that is an orderly decoupling from Communist China. And how that occurs and can we do it in an orderly way is going to be kind of messy at times. Witness the rare earth minerals and these AI chips. But we should make no mistake to our countrymen that that is absolutely required for our national survival.
Couldn't agree more. And I would just say that the thrust of the letter, and I'd love to get your response to this, Colonel, that we sent to Steve Miller was one of the things that should be done here is picking up on a theme of the national security strategy that, as you say, trade should be fair and reciprocity should be one of the, leitmotifs of trade. Is that if the Chinese are in fact going to restrict the access of American defense companies and what they perceive to be dual use manufacturing concerns, they would not be, in other words, given the free flow as they say, of Chinese rare earth minerals, then the least we can do is stop funding Chinese military companies, of which there are quite a number traded, if not actually listed, in our capital markets. And this, Colonel, I know is one of the things that as a business leader, as a guy who has been very anxious about what these elites are doing with our money, is, something you are rightly focused on as well. But I would just ask, if this sort of subsidizing of the enemy's military industrial complex, especially, but really it's, given their civil military fusion, it's pretty much the whole, national industrial capabilities of China that are similarly configured to support their military. This would seem to me to be something that is both urgently needed, of course, cutting that off, if not as Brian would like, and I would, wholesale decoupling, but at the very minimum, on a reciprocal basis, impinging upon their military industrial capabilities. Shouldn't we be about that right away? And if we don't, is this likely to be seen again by the Chinese as a lack of seriousness on our part, and further perhaps inducement to upping their game in terms of their warfare against us, Colonel?
Well, I think the short answer to your comments is yes. The Chinese look at this and they're always looking, and they're saying, are the Americans doing something that hurts us, that we don't want them to do, puts us at a disadvantage and improves the American position? And I don't know that there's a lot of things they see that they must really like, as you said, that they still have access to American capital markets. They can list their companies in the United States without following any of the rules anyone else does. They can register their companies to trade shares as well. And they've caused all this harm with fentanyl and no real response to it. The Americans, until maybe last week, were dithering about it and seemed to be happy to have the Chinese just promise to talk about it, see if they could actually find out who it was that was making this fentanyl that's going to America. They can do the mathematics and can count our number of ships and how fast we're building them. They have some sense of our war stocks. And they also have very good sense of the political situation when, goodness, maybe half of the United States has Trump derangement syndrome. If your main enemy has that sort of domestic confusion, well, you like that. And we need to ask ourselves, what is it the Chinese don't want us to do? And then we start doing it, which is rebuilding our military, getting our financial house in order. And like Xi Jinping has routinely complained to the Americans, don't weaponize trade, which means that when we use trade as a weapon to pressure the Chinese, that they don't like it because it's effective. He also doesn't like blocs being formed, which means the free nations get together to defend themselves against China. So when we build up our allies' capabilities, our friends' capabilities, both to defend themselves and also to operate us, well, that's a good thing. But this national will commitment, if the Chinese see that, they're not going to like it. And when they're still allowed to buy property in the United States, basically run the marijuana business, the marijuana farming business and distribution business and the financial end of it all in just about every American state, nothing's done about it other than we talk about it and Senate congressional committees issue reports. Well, they see a country that is not all that serious yet. And fundamentally, if our thinking is that, well, we're going to compete with the Chinese and we're going to outdo them, we're going to outperform them, well, if that's our thinking, we're going to lose. Because the Chinese don't see this as a sort of a competition. They see it as a war. So when one side is trying to kill you and you think that you're going to somehow deal with them on a sort of normal basis, have a normal relationship, well, that's just never going to happen. I don't know when we're going to wake up to that. But at some point, this is going to, we're going to have to break into two blocks worldwide. And one is the free nations and one is the other nations. And until we get there, it's going to be perilous for us because China is building up quickly and we're not. And they are actually, they're behind our lines. They're in the United States. They're all over the Pacific and just waiting. And so we're getting, unfortunately, we're not doing what's necessary, and the Chinese like what they see. So always look at things from your enemy's perspective. And that's the word they use. They call us the main enemy. Is look at it and ask yourself, what is it that they don't want us to do? And then you start doing it. So it's not all that hard to figure out. And mention the word reciprocity. Well, that's something that even a monkey could figure out. That, well, if you can't do something in China, why should they be able to do it here? It's a pretty easy standard to apply. The donor class may not like it, Wall Street may not like it, and the Chinese and their proxies would scream bloody murder, but that just means you should do it.
Colonel, one more to you, and then back to Brian to close us out. The point that you made about marijuana is really resonating with me, both in terms of this idea that we want, more of it to be consumed in this country, and that the Chinese are, doing these grow houses operations, a variety of states across the country. I know Maine and Oklahoma get a lot of attention, but it raises a larger point to me, and that is the role of the American people in all of this. There is a often used expression, of course, that you're encouraged to see something. If you do see something, I should say, you should say something about it. And my concern is that, especially, in light of all of these important points that you and Sam Faddis have made, the American people equipped to know what to look for, whether it's in grow houses or whether it's in, firing ranges or factories or other places, to know what to be seeing when they see it, and then saying something about it. I'm very persuaded, particularly, and both of you have spoken powerfully to this, the fact that we may have as many as, well, let's just say 10,000, let alone 200,000 Chinese special operations soldiers in our country, with presumably orders to cause massive disruption on command. Is there any evidence that the administration is taking this threat seriously and is equipping the public to be on the lookout, crowdsourcing, if you will, the kind of situational awareness that is necessary, hopefully, to rolling these guys up before they do harm, and at the very least, countering them if, God forbid, that happens? What are your thoughts on that, Colonel?
Well, I haven't heard it or seen it. I haven't seen anyone addressing the U.S. public about this threat and the need to do something about it. And that's where an administration has to take charge. There's obviously good people like Representative John Molinar and the Select China Committee, who's excellent. And they put out very good reports. But it really requires somebody with the bully pulpit to actually start proselytizing about this and speaking up. And we just haven't had that. Unfortunately, I think the American people in general would respond to this. And I would point to that Chinese spy balloon that came over the United States a few years ago, that when people looked up and saw this and asked what is going on with the People's Republic, what is going on with China, that did more than anything that anyone has ever written, probably put together, to wake up the American people. And I think that it just really requires something to spur them into action. Sometimes it does take a punch in the nose, but I think the Americans would understand it. But also local governments, local law enforcement has plenty of tools to address this issue. And some states have done it very well. Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, a few examples, Texas as well. So it can be done. And that I'm not too confident about the federal level, but the state level You can create awareness, you can take legislative measures, law enforcement measures to go after this, but it has to be a priority, and you do need you have to do it nationwide as well. So it's not at all a lost cause, but it is getting a bit late in the day. And one hopes that that we do wake up. But when you say, for example, when you do look at the role of the Chinese in these marijuana farms, grow houses, it is as depressing as anything could be. And if this is not a national emergency, one hardly knows what it would be. But I said there's some places that are doing good work. There's a private outfit, State Armor, that is excellent. So it shows what can be done. And there have been some successes, but there's a lot more work to be done. And the Chinese donor class and our donor class do still have an awful lot of unhealthy influence in Washington and elsewhere.
Amen to all that. Brian Kennedy, finally, when you think about these strategic matters, I wondered if one of the things that might also be communicated to the public about what we're up against is evidenced in what we've just witnessed the Chinese doing to Jimmy Lai, a unbelievably impressive human being, a billionaire who is now almost certainly serving what will be a death sentence in Chinese prison for having stood with those who aspire to maintain freedom in Hong Kong. And it's it's partly about the tragedy of his story and the fact that he's just been convicted of national security crimes on top of others that he'd been fraudulently charged with and convicted of previously. But it's in a way, Brian, is it not, a personification, if you will, of what the Chinese have done to the city he fled to from communist China and, made a tremendous success of himself and did so much for the cause of freedom there. I'm just thinking about this in the context of what has been said today about the Kuomintang in Taiwan looking more and more like people who will betray their countrymen to a similar fate. And whether that prospect should not only be concentrating the minds, of course, of the Taiwanese, but also us here in the United States and freedom-loving people elsewhere, moved as we are by Jimmy's plight, but also what's really on the line here. Would you speak to that, please?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Frank. The Jimmy Lai question, of course, is tragic, but not surprising. The communist Chinese are going to suppress and jail and persecute anybody who crosses them. And Jimmy Lai represents a defense of freedom in Hong Kong. And so he's going to be persecuted, prosecuted, now put in jail. It should be a signal to the people in Taiwan that you can't make a deal with communist China, that ultimately, over time, they're going to have their way wherever they want to really, whether it's invasion or economic absorption of Taiwan, that the communist Chinese are the rulers. I think from an international point of view, Jimmy Lai tells a good story, and it's an important lesson for people. But when it comes to Americans, I don't think Americans look at that and think much about it, just to be blunt. They look at something happening in China or Hong Kong, they expect the communist Chinese government to do those kind of things. And so that will not be, it seems to me, a very important lesson for Americans. If we're going to be serious, just to close this out, Grant said it, are we serious? If we're serious, we have to look at what it is the Chinese are doing to we Americans. And if we're not going to be serious about that, we're certainly not going to be serious about Hong Kong or Taiwan or Japan or anywhere else. If we cannot see that they mean the destruction of the United States, then all is going to be lost. So long as we let communist China have their way in the American economy, they will believe we are not serious. If they can buy real estate in the United States, especially around military installations, if they can come to U.S. stock markets and raise capital, if they can trade almost at will in the United States their goods, the Chinese will not believe the United States is serious. Today, the communist Chinese owe American citizens almost $7 trillion in defaulted sovereign debt. $7 trillion. Are we forcing them to pay on that? No. They don't have to, when it comes to the stock market that we've talked about a lot on these shows, we don't require them to even have the accounting standards of American corporations. There is no reciprocity here. That may be a principle that the Trump administration has stated, but we are not operating in such a way that reciprocity is actually taking hold or being enforced against communist China. So long as that is the case, the Chinese themselves will believe they are winning the war. And if there's anything Americans should be taking away this holiday season, is that freedom is a very precarious thing in the best of times. Even though we have President Trump, who's the greatest president of my lifetime, if he is not supported by the American people and by a more robust administration, the future of this country will be very much in jeopardy. We can fix these things, as Grant says, but it is getting pretty late in the day. There needs to be a national commitment in 2026 that we will take the necessary steps, both economically and militarily, to make sure that we're defending the interests of the American people. That's President Trump's goal, and it's an aspiration, but we've yet to achieve it. That should be the thing we focus on in 2026.
Amen. Brian Kennedy and Grant Newsham, as well as Sam Faddis, we deeply appreciate your contributions to our understanding of where we are at the end of 2025, how we got here, the mistakes that we've made that have made the prospects for 2026 quite daunting. It may not be too late, but if it isn't too late, it is going to only be because we have aroused ourselves to understand what these webinars, now some 220 of them, I believe, that the Committee on the Present Danger China has sponsored, all of them available again for free at presentdangerchina.org. Those and the kind of information that we've been marshaling and trying to disseminate as widely as we can are the sorts of things that need to now translate into a heightened degree of situational awareness, yes, but also action on the part of the American people. And I'll just close with this thought. One of the other things that is going to happen in 2026, of course, is there will be elections nationwide, not national elections in the sense of presidency, of course, but in terms of members of the Senate, members of the House of Representatives, some governors, lots of state legislatures. This is a moment for an informed and urgent national debate about the sorts of things we've discussed here today. It can be the catalyst. It can be the mandate for action by those who are elected come the fall. And I'll just conclude, as we have done on occasion, picking up on your point, Brian, and that is that as certainly one of the other contenders for the position of greatest president of my lifetime, Ronald Reagan, famously told us repeatedly, every generation faces an existential threat to freedom. Unfortunately, in our time, The Chinese Communist one is absolutely existential in its magnitude. But it's not alone. And as we have been talking about in other programs sponsored by our Institute for the American Future in the context of the Victory Coalition, for example, the Sharia supremacists, who are in many ways joined at the hips with the Chinese communists, not necessarily in terms of the end state they seek, but in terms of achieving the desired end state by getting rid of us, a shared objective, as it is with those we address in our sovereignty coalition, the globalists, the elites internationally, as well as here. This makes the character of the threat, the existential character of the threat to our country in this moment in 2026, the sort of thing that simply cannot be ignored. So it starts with, I hope, those candidates running for office, seeking not just votes, but seeking a mandate to do as Ronald Reagan famously did, which is to make clear the nature of the threat his generation was facing from the Soviet Union at the time, and to make the American people aware of that threat and enlist their help in acting upon it, first with their mandate and then with their support politically, as the resources are marshaled and the actions taken that are needed. So I simply would close in prayer for a peaceful end to 2025 and the prospects of a peace through strength in 2026 that protects this country from all comers, including most especially those emanating from the worst malign ambitions of the Chinese Communist Party. And we thank all of you for attending this particular program, if not in real time in the days to come. As always, we ask your help in bringing it to the attention of others in your circles of influence who need to know as well what's on the line and need to be enlisted as well in the corrective actions that are now required. God bless you. God bless America. God bless this experiment, this providentially ordered experiment in freedom in 2026 and beyond.